Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. My name is Amy Doan, and I am the Manager of Domestic Promotion for USA Rice Federation. So part of my role is to do outreach and education for groups like yours, like teachers, and especially family and consumer science teachers. We certainly reach out to your group a lot just to talk with you about the and healthy benefits of eating rice. Our speaker today is Garlough. He comes to us from Michigan, and he can talk a little bit more about his background, but Bob is a chef educator and somebody with a lot of culinary background and experience. I'm going to go ahead and let Bob get started, and I'm going to mute my line, but I will be taking questions. Have questions as the presentation goes along. Everyone will be silenced through the webinar function, but you can ask questions through the questions or chat boxes in the little menu box that you have. So feel free to use, and if you have trouble with anything, please by all means raise your hand or somehow show you're having trouble, and I will do my best to assist. And with that, I'll let Bob get started.
All right, thank you, Amy, and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for sitting in on this webinar that's been brought to you by the USA Rice Federation. We're going to start out with a little bit of a presentation overview and a little bit of background about myself and why this is important to you. I'll get to myself in a minute, and we'll talk about why this is important to you, and we'll cover just quickly a little reminder about the national standards relative to teaching rice. We'll conduct 5 different teaching moments. These are small modules about the subject of rice. And also at the end, we're going to identify some free resources that are available to you from USA Rice that you can bring right into your classroom. Right, who am I? I have spent 33 years as a full-time culinary educator, and my first teaching experience was at a technical center in St. Augustine, Florida. And at that technical center, we had secondary and post-secondary students mixed in classes together, and they lasted for 2, 3, and 6 contact hours a day. And the center was based on an open entry, open exit, competency-based, individualized instruction. Okay? Open entry, open exit, competency-based, individualized instruction, 2, 3, and 6 hour students. So they could start one week and another student could start a few weeks later. I can tell you this, that there were a lot of task lists that I had to maintain, and again, that was my first teaching experience, and so I have a whole lot of respect for people, teachers at the secondary level who are involved in keeping track of what their students are doing and delivering a quality education to their students. And I just want to let you know that I can understand what it's like being a teacher in your situation. I also want to say that as a 33-year culinary educator, I've spent a lot of time sitting in workshops and seminars and faculty in-services listening to presenters and sitting there at the very beginning and wondering, is this person going to be able to relate to me? Does this person understand my job? So I want to let you know I do understand your job. So I've taught, as I said, at the secondary level. Then I moved to Michigan and started a culinary arts program and ran that for over 20 years. I worked as a full-time professor, as an adjunct professor at the university level. So I've kind of taught at different levels and been an administrator as well as a faculty member. My background includes degrees in education, a master's in occupational education, BBA in restaurant lodging management, and an associate's degree in culinary arts. I've had kind of one foot in 2 industries. I've been an educator, but I've also spent a lot of time in the food service industry, sometimes at the same time, sometimes separately. So my background includes working as a professional chef, food service director for a college, food and beverage director for nightclubs, and helped found a family-owned catering business 24 years ago. So I've got a variety of different industry experiences too. As part of my job at the community college, I had a course called International Cuisine and Culture, and I took students to other countries to learn about their cuisine and their culture, getting them these experiential experiences, immersing in the culture. And I saw a lot of rice. I saw rice in all these different dishes, and visited rice fields and mills in China, in Italy, different places, and I really came to appreciate the value of rice as this international food item that was so important to so many different cultures. And also I was an ex-English major at one point in my life, and so I've written 4 different culinary textbooks, which that kind of taught me about looking at food and how to explain food in a different way. Okay, WIFMs. What's in it for me? You and I know that it's very important to appeal to a student's interest. How are we going to motivate them? And we know that motivation is an internal force and an external force. So talking about you, what's in this for you? Well, again, we're going to review the national standards that you're responsible for in teaching of rice. We're going to probably tell you some things that you don't know about rice. I would expect all of you have varying degrees of knowledge about rice, but we're going to probably cover some things that you didn't know. We'll hit on some ideas for teaching. As we go through this, you might be thinking about, how could I introduce this to my students? And certainly at the very end, we're going to show you a great variety of teaching aids that are free and available to you. All right, now these standards that I referred to, this is where they came from, and here they are. They're actually broken down into 3 different areas. The first one has to do with food production and services, and there's 3 in this area. So the first one talks about the cooking of rice, right? How it's cooked. And then the second one deals with the items themselves, the different ingredients, rice being one. And then we talk about increasing nutritional retention, making sure that we cook the food in such a way that we can help retain the natural qualities of the ingredient itself. So then we get into a little bit of the food science and dietetics, and there's 5 areas here to cover, talking about, again, principles of food production that help maximize nutrient retention, getting into understanding food preferences, why we would put certain menu items together and their appeal to a local and international audience. The actual preparation of the food and its quality factors, looking at menu items and how rice is integrated into all different parts of the menu. Rice is a very appropriate ingredient at all times of the day, and you'll see that. And then also we need to look at developing menus that are not only nutritionally relevant and nutritionally important for the consumer, but it's something that they can afford. It satiates them, and it's something that it fits into their budget. And rice at less than 10 cents a serving meets that need. Then the last 3 here, we'll talk about, what's the proper way of storing this ingredient so it maintains its quality. Talk about where does it come from, accessing it, making sure that you have a quality product, and then different labeling systems, how to look for that Made in the USA logo that you'll see on rice that is grown here in our country. Okay, so the 5 teaching moments that we were talking about, this is what we're going to cover. So we've got the history and production of rice. Then we'll move into a little bit of the science and varieties. Nothing too heavy, but it does help you understand how we classify rice. Then looking at the many different benefits that are involved in using U.S. grown rice. We'll cover a little bit of the basics when it comes to cooking, and then give some examples of how rice is used in different international cuisines. So let's go ahead and get started and talk about the basics of rice. What is it? Well, it's a semi-aquatic grass that thrives in warm climates and subtropical climates. Okay, rice is grown all around the world, but it really wasn't a native plant to this country. It was brought to this country, and we'll talk about that in just a second, obviously it's a staple that is used over half the world's population. So how did it get here to the U.S.? Well, you can see on the map here that about 4,000 years ago, back in 2000 BC roughly, that they figure this is where it started. And then from here, it kind of went around the world and eventually found its way over here to North America. They figure that, as the story goes, it probably arrived around the 1680s on a merchant ship that crashed off the coast of South Carolina in some storm. And in the hold of this ship, there was rice that had come from Madagascar. So the local people living there helped the merchant ship get repaired and send it on its way. But in appreciation to the local people who helped repair the ship, they gave some of the cargo from the ship, and it was rice that was then nicknamed Carolina Gold. And it became a very major crop in our country. Now you have to remember what our country looked like at that time. It basically went up and down the Atlantic seaboard. It never really was that far, the country didn't expand that far west at that time. So this was considered really a major crop. Following around the Civil War, around 1860, 1870s, due to some economic reasons and some bad weather, rice kind of slowed down in the Carolinas and Georgia and started moving its way west. And it moved into the rice belt. It ended up out in California in the early 1900s, and it was brought there largely in part to the Asian population that was brought in for construction, most notably the railroads. And because of this large Asian population, they started growing rice out in California to help feed that group of people. So where do we find rice here in the U.S.? And if you look on this map, you're going to see the rice delta, which is right down here. So these 5 states and the state of California. These are the 6 most important, largest rice-producing states in the United States. And about 20 billion pounds are produced annually between these 6 states. California itself produces more than 2 million tons of rice annually, which is second only to Arkansas. And you can see that Arkansas accounts for 45% of the total U.S. rice acreage. All right? So California doesn't have as much acreage in its production of rice per acre. The most efficient use of growing techniques and the production from their acreage, over 800 pounds per acre, or 8,000 pounds per acre. Okay, and of course Sacramento's Valley, the Sacramento Valley grows short and medium grain rice and a lot of different specialty varieties. Medium grain rice is the major rice that is grown out in California. So let's talk about the cultivation and milling of the rice. Years ago, most of the rice-producing states would plant their rice by use of an airplane. And now, and mostly around the rice delta, they'll use machinery on ground to plant the seeds. But out in California, they still use the airplane, a very typical and efficient way of planting the rice. Sometimes the rice is soaked, so it gets a little heavier, and the plane will fly in around 100 miles an hour, that's about the speed, and it'll drop the rice and actually embed the rice into the furrows. Oops, we'll back up here just a second. American growers, like I said, sometimes they'll use the machinery here, and this is more around the rice delta. In other parts of the world, what they'll do is they'll get the seedlings started and then hand plant them. But these are in countries where they're just doing maybe 12 or 14 acres and doing this by hand, because you can imagine what kind of back-breaking work it is. So they don't really have a mechanized system for doing this, whereas rice farms here in the U.S., they could be handling 600, 800, 1,000 acres at a time. In California, there are 2,500 roughly rice families that are involved in the growing of rice. Now, rice is different than other kinds of grains because it's grown in a flooded field. It's a different form of cultivation. And the thing that's really great about it is that out in California, for example, rice is grown on soils that are unsuitable for other crops because of the poor drainage that exists in that land. And so, but it is ideal for the growing of rice. So that's a great win-win, okay? And so what happens is they will flood the land where they plant the rice, and this helps to reduce weeds and other kinds of items like pests, and it actually, you know, provides the moisture for germinating the plant. And it's great for wildlife too. It provides a great habitat for the wildlife. Eventually, draining will occur before they harvest. But initially they'll get it started around 2 to 3 inches, and then it takes, well, 3 to 6 months for it to reach maturity. What happens is they'll start with the planting of the rice in late March and into April, and that's when it'll be flooded, and then it'll go through until late summer. Then they will kind of drain the fields around September, and then the rice is harvested in around October. So the rice out in California should have been harvested in the last several weeks. And then end of October into November, the hay that's left is then harvested for animal feed, and the fields are then prepared for the next growing year. What will happen is during the course of the growing, the rice stalks will absorb the water, and that's what will fill the grains of rice, okay? And they're looking for a moisture content of around 20% at the time of harvesting. Out in California, after the initial flooding of the field to 2 or 3 inches to get the rice started, then they'll increase the water levels 4 or 5 inches and maintain that consistent depth. They don't want it too deep in water. That's not healthy for the plant, but they have to make sure there's enough water in there in the heat so they don't have it evaporating off and negatively affecting the growing of the rice. So then in early summer, what you'll see is these long panicles on the top of the plant will form, and basically they're hollow, and they will be absorbing moisture up through the stalk, and then they will fill with moisture, and they'll get heavier. All right. As they get heavier, then they'll start to bend over. All right. Now on your left, you'll see a close-up of some medium rice. So this is very common out in California. And here's some long grain rice, which you might see grown down in places like Arkansas. Okay. Now the harvesting of the rice. What they'll do is they will drain the field, so the rice will stop absorbing moisture, and the byproduct of that process is it starts to dry out a little bit. And they want to get it around 12% or so moisture content of the rice, because if it's too wet after they harvest the grain and they put it into storage, it could germinate again, or it could mold. So they want to get it where there's a lower level of moisture in there. But they need to have a certain amount of moisture so when they go to separate the rice and mill the rice, it doesn't crack. It's the same way as with wheat flour. It's about the same process here. So what they'll do near the end of summer, September or so, they will drain off the moisture from the fields, wait a few weeks, let it dry out, so then the mechanical harvesters can come in on the harder soil and harvest it all up and separate the rice off and load it into trucks. Then they haul it off to the dryers, and they will again mechanically blow dry these separated grains of rice. And the separated grains, it's called rough rice or paddy rice or cargo rice. Those are the nicknames for it. This is rice exactly as it comes from the field. It has not been milled yet. Okay, and so after they have dried it, then they'll go ahead and they'll put it into these storage units waiting till it goes on to be milled. So here you'll see as the anatomy of a rice grain, and as I said just a minute ago, it's very similar to a wheat kernel. What you have is the four parts to it. You've got this protective outer coating called the hull. And this hull is something that's indigestible to human beings. Animals could eat this because they could digest all this. But before a human can eat this rice, they have to remove the hull. Again, as it comes from the field with the hull on there, it's known as rough rice or paddy rice, like the rice as it came directly from the paddy. Once the hull has been removed, what remains is, again, this lightly protective coating called the bran. Underneath the bran, you have this white section here, the largest section, called the endosperm. And then you've got a little bit of the germ down here. This is the fatty section that helps to germinate the plant. All right? When you remove the hull, what's left is what we call whole grain rice. And the most common whole grain rice is brown rice. Okay, so that's where the hull's removed and that brown outer coating is still on there. But not all whole grain rices are brown. There are red and black whole grain rices too, so don't let that confuse you. All right, now once the rice has been milled, they'll take it to a machine and they will shell off that outer coating. They'll remove, if they want to take the whole grain rice and take it down to just white rice, they will gently rub the rice together in machines and it removes the bran and the germ. Now, of course, both of those parts are then collected. What remains after the bran and germ are removed are white rice. Okay? In the U.S., because there's a lot of nutritional value found in the bran and some in the germ itself, what we do in our country is we kind of replace some of that lost nutritional value with the addition of thiamine, niacin, iron, and also fortified with folic acid. Okay, so rice, this is how we'll look at it from an overview. As it comes directly from the paddy, there is no milling. And this is the whole rice before it's milled, and again, it's not digestible by humans. The whole grain rice, such as brown, red, or black rice, has got that outer hull removed, and what's left is the bran, the germ, and the endosperm. When you take off the bran and the germ, what you're left with is white rice. Okay. Now again, white rice was brought to the North America from another part of the world. It's not a plant that was native to this continent, but wild rice is. Wild rice is a different aquatic grass, and it is native to North America, and it's not related to the rice that we've just been talking about. So wild rice is not technically considered rice, right? It's got a different botanical family. Wild rice is grown in many of the states in the United States, and it's cultivated for sale in Minnesota and California. And if you look down here, you'll see a web address to California wild rice, and it's a great website to go to. They've got recipes. There's a chef's group that's in there. There's a lot of different information that you can find out on the use of California wild rice. Okay, so as teachers, you know what gets measured gets done, and so I'm going to ask you a few questions here. At the end of each section, I'm going to ask you 4 questions just to see if you've retained what we're talking about. So our first question here is, how much of the rice that is consumed in the United States is actually grown here? The answer is over 80%. Over 80% of the rice that is consumed in the U.S. came here. And how long has it been cultivated in the U.S.? Remember I told you over 4,000 years ago? So back in 2000 BC, over in China, India area. And what region in California produces an abundance of medium and short grain rice? You know this one, the Sacramento Valley. Last question in this area. Name the 4 nutrients to enrich long grain rice. They include thiamine, niacin, iron, and folic acid. Very good. Okay, let's move on to the next section. Let's talk about rice, all about rice. Rice is classified in a variety of ways. We can categorize it by the degree of milling, and we just talked about that, right? Where the hull is removed, and then it's no longer called rough rice or paddy rice, and then if you leave the bran on it and the germ and the endosperm, that's whole grain, and if you remove the bran and the germ, then it's white rice. We can also categorize it by kernel size, flavor, and starch content. So we just talked about the paddy rice and the whole grain rice and the white rice. Now, do you ever realize there's some co-products that come off? What do they do with that germ? What do they do with the bran? There's a lot of different items that are out on the market that are used in bakeries, in different food products. I used to teach baking for 10 years, and I made gluten-free breads, and rice flour was a very important ingredient in the making of these breads. It gave a nice texture to it, and a nice flavor, and of course nutritional value. And there's all these other items that are available on the market made from rice. Okay? Now, when we talk about the classification by kernel size, I'm sure you're all familiar with long grain rice, medium grain rice, and short grain rice. Different sizes here, and within those subcategories, you can see some very familiar names, I'm sure. And these here are ones that are grown in your area, in California, and they're used a lot in the making of sushi, risotto, paella, jambalaya, different rice puddings, and things like that. Okay, so kernel sizes, long, medium, and short grain rice. And again, getting into that medium and short grain rices, you've got the flavor aspects of it. They have a certain aroma that they'll give off, and we call these aromatic rices. Another way of classifying rices has to do with their starch content. Long grain rice contains more of the amylose, and it's a little firmer, and it fluffs up a little better, and it's good for the pilafs and entrees and salads. Now, any of you that make jams, you might be familiar with the pectin that you use for helping to thicken the jam, and it kind of helps it make it a little sticky. So that's my way of remembering the term amylopectin, which again is a soft and sticky starch that's found more commonly in the medium and short grain rices. And that's why these rices are good for making risotto and sushi and rice pudding. All right, so these are the 2 starches. You're going to find some kind of starch in all the rices, and depending on its size, again, the long grain rice has more amylose, the short and medium grain rice is more amylopectin. Okay, and these are just the different kinds of processes or availability of rice that you can find on the market. Now, I want to point out there is a difference between parboiled rice and pre-cooked rice. Okay, they're not to be confused. Parboiled rice is rice that you take the paddy rice. Remember, that's got that outside hull on it that you can't digest, and they steam the rice slightly with this hull covering on there. Okay, and what it does is some of the color and some of the flavor will come off of that hull, and they'll enter in through the bran and into the endosperm of the rice. But still, this is not cooked rice. So then what they'll do is after they steam it inside this hull, then the hull is removed, all right, and the rice has to still be fully cooked before serving. Okay, that's parboiled rice. Pre-cooked rice is rice that has been pre-cooked, and all you have to do is kind of basically rehydrate the rice. Okay, next set of questions. Let's see how you do. Which type of rice, long, medium, or short grain, produces softer, stickier cooked rice. Medium and short grain rice. Very good. Okay. Why is paddy rice inedible by humans? It's because that hull or husk is indigestible, and we have to have that removed first. Describe one reason why enriched white rice should not be rinsed before or after cooking. I'm not sure that we talked about this, but washing that rice like your grandmother might have done in the olden days will wash away some of the enrichment that's been added to the rice. And in the olden days, it might have been necessary to wash the rice because maybe sanitation wasn't as good, or there was technical issues. There were more stones found in there, or the rice came from a foreign country where their sanitation practices weren't that good. But we know in modern times we have improved our technology. We have improved our sanitation habits. So it is no longer necessary if you're using U.S. grown rice to wash the rice. And it's really not a good idea to do it. Now, people will still do it sometimes to make the rice stickier if they want to do it in making like sushi or something like that. If they intentionally want to make sticky rice, they can wash the rice, and that will bring out the starches and help to make it stickier. But you chance losing some of the nutritional value when you do that, okay? So rinsing enriched rice washes off some of the enrichment, and it reduces its nutritional value in the process. Okay, which starch molecule found in rice is associated with the soft and sticky rice? Amylopectin. Remember I said think of pectin there and making jams for stickiness? Amylopectin. All right, let's go on to our next section here. This is our third module of 5, and we're going to talk about some of the many benefits of using U.S. grown rice. First of all, the growing of and selling of rice contributes to our economy here. The United States rice industry grows about 20 billion pounds annually, half of which is exported and sold to other countries. In California, statistics show that about 60% of the rice that you grow in California is consumed here in the U.S. because of your specialty rice industry that you have out there. It's in high demand in this country and a lot of the Asian markets here in the U.S. And so only about 40% of what you grow is exported, again, because of the high demand here in our own country for your specialty rice. The industry generates about $34 billion in U.S. economic activity, providing more than 128,000 jobs in the U.S. Now let's talk about sustainability, a very, very important topic. And the USA Rice Federation defines it in 2 ways. One, they think it's very important that we make efficient use of the resources, that we protect the environment as we're doing it. So we want to be very, very cognizant of our energy consumption, our water consumption, our soil erosion, and things like that. All right. And secondly, we want to make sure that we are providing a product here that is nutritious and safe and is economically viable also for the growers who are doing this for their living. So these are 2 issues relative to sustainability. Now we know that rice is a sustainable crop, and research has shown drastic improvements over the last 30 years. It's shown a 35% decrease in land use. So what that translates is that they're getting a higher production out of each acreage. A 53% decrease in irrigated water use. Now in the United States, we're fortunate compared to most countries around the world with the amount of fresh water that we have available. But it is still a resource that is diminishing in our own country. So we know that we have to pay a lot of attention to preserving our fresh water. Soil erosion, you talk to any farmer and they're going to tell you that is a big concern of theirs to protect the soil. And of course energy use. Energy is more and more expensive, so anything we can do to reduce the costs and the consumption of energy is important, and a whopping 38% decrease in greenhouse gas emissions. A lot of that has to do with burning of the fields after rice has been harvested, and the production or the harvesting of the rice. So anyway, if you look at these statistics here, they're pretty impressive, and the rest of the agricultural industries could take a lesson from the way that the rice farmers are careful about their crops. And another thing to be cognizant of is growing of rice has always been a very eco-friendly activity. From the very, very beginning, the growing of rice has provided habitats to waterfowl and frogs and even crawfish. Top 10 benefits of rice in food service. Lots of things to look at here. It's a staple all around the world, used in our own dishes here at home and ethnic dishes around the world. It's a very versatile type of ingredient. Again, it's used in appetizers and salads and desserts and main courses, and it's used at breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Very versatile ingredient. Because it is a neutral ingredient, it's great to be matched with other stronger flavors. It's what's called a flavor carrier. Nutritionally wholesome, a very important benefit of the rice itself. It is low cost. I said less than 10 cents per serving. And so in the food industry, we call these inexpensive but nutrition ingredients extenders. You think to yourself about spaghetti and meatballs. You can't fill the people up on the meatballs, you fill them up on the spaghetti. You know, sauteed shrimp with linguine, same concept. So rice and chicken concept, same thing. They're satiated with the rice, and they get the nutritional value from eating the rice, but it's a lot cheaper than the price of the shrimp or the beef or the chicken or other proteins that are on the menu. It's easy to prepare. It stores very well. It's a non-perishable item. We'll talk about that in a minute. It travels well. It's good for rice bowls, takeout meals, things like that. It's very widespread in its use, and it's a very convenient ingredient in which to use. Now, before we talked about rice being nutritious, and we throw that word nutrition around, pretty casually, but we really should take a look at what it means. Nutrition, or nutritious, comes from the root word nutri or nutrite. What that means is to nourish the body, all right? And so if you think about words like nutrient, nutritious, nutrition, all that stems from the root words nutri or nutrite, again, to nourish the body. So rice is nutritious because it is sodium cholesterol free, it's low calorie, it's very nutrient dense, just a trace of fat, but no saturated fats or trans fats. It's comprised of complex carbohydrates. So again, it satiates the body and it's slow to digest. So you eat it and you stay full for a longer period of time. Very healthy diet. Of course, brown rice is very, very popular in the United States, and whole grain rices are very popular in the United States because of their nutritional value too. Gluten-free, and you, I'm sure, are very cognizant of the concerns of gluten in school food service and students that may have sensitivities to gluten. And one of the wonderful things about rice is it is the least allergenic of the grains, and it's naturally gluten-free. Gluten is really a substance that's made up of a mixture of glutenin and gliadin. When gluten and gliadin are found in an ingredient, and then when mixed with water, gluten is the result of it. And so the people who suffer from the celiac disease, gluten intolerance, have a lot of issues with this. And so rice is now used more and more, like I said, rice flours and gluten-free bread and as thickening agents in foods to where people who might have a sensitivity to wheat-based items don't have to be concerned about that. All right, now here we go. Let's review these questions. 2 reasons why rice is an ideal grain for people with celiac disease or gluten sensitivity. Just talked about it. Rice does not contain gluten, and it's the least allergenic of all the grains. True or false? Rice is proven to be a very sustainable crop. Well, of course, that's very true. How many dollars does the USA rice industry contribute annually to the American economy? About $34 billion. True or false? Rice is an inexpensive ingredient to use in meal planning. Of course, about 10 cents a serving. All right, cooking. Let's go on to this. As we said before, rice is an ideal flavor carrier that when you mix with different seasonings, different vegetables, aromatics, proteins, it's a great flavor transfer. Okay, it's definitely considered an essential ingredient because it stores very well and has a long shelf life. So chefs out in the food service industry or people at home both need to know how to work with rice, how to shop for it, how to store it, and how to cook for it. We would recommend strongly that you only use a supplier that you trust. When I taught students in the culinary school, we would often visit suppliers like a Cisco food service broadline distributor's warehouse just to see how that functioned, but to get an idea of sanitation practices too. I would even take students out to flour mills. We didn't have any rice mills nearby, but I would take them to a flour mill so they learned about the processing and the milling of flour, because I think it's very important for people to learn about the pedigree of food. Where does it come from? All right, so you should figure out where does your rice come from and see if it has the Grown in the USA logo or some other logo indicating that it was grown in the United States or in California. All right, storing of rice, well, basically you just want to keep it cool and dry. A metal tin container with a tight-fitting lid or a plastic container is fine. Now, whole grain brown rice has about 6 months of shelf life when it's left just in a dry storage area, like a pantry, or up to a year if you do refrigerate it. And the reason for that is because there's some of the fat content that's still in the germ and a little bit also of it in the bran, and that's what would go rancid over a period of time. So whole grain rice has a shorter storage time than white rice. White rice stores basically indefinitely. Okay. Now looking at the proportion of liquid to rice when we cook it, the general rule of thumb is about 2 parts liquid to 1 part rice. So what you'll do is you'll get your vessel, whether it's a measuring cup or just a glass in your cupboard or whatever, you scoop it up, fill it to the top with rice, dump that into the pan, use that same vessel, and fill it twice with your cooking liquid. Your cooking liquid could be water, it could be a stock, it could be a tomato juice if you're making Spanish rice, a variety of different liquids. But that's the general rule of thumb. But depending on the rice, there are different amounts of liquid that you would put in there. So that 2-to-1 ratio is for long grain rice. As the dimension of the rice shortens, then you'll use less cooking liquid. The cooking time remains about the same. All right. Notice parboiled rice. Now remember, that's not pre-cooked rice. That takes a little more liquid in there and a longer cooking period. Brown rice takes 40 to 45 minutes to cook. And if you're cooking like arborio rice and you're making, for example, risotto, you can use up to 4 times the volume in liquid, and it takes about 22 minutes or so to make a risotto. All right, so the liquids do vary, as do the cooking times, depending on the rice. So it's important to know the type of rice that you're using. To determine the yield, it's pretty simple math. If you use 1 cup of rice and 2 cups of liquid, you end up with 3 cups of the final product. Okay, 1 cup of dry rice, 2 cups of liquid, 1 and 2 equals 3. Now, basic methods for cooking rice. We'll just go over those very quickly, and I'm sure you're familiar with them. But if you look down here, you'll see menurice.com for video demonstrations. And Amy, at the end of this presentation, is going to take you to the USA Rice Federation website, and she'll show you some examples of these video demonstrations that you could bring into your classroom. Simmering method is basically appropriate for all types of rice, and it's very simple. You're going to measure out your dry rice, put it into your saucepan, measure out your liquid, bring it up to boil, reduce to a liquid, and you cook it for the length of time depending on the size of the rice. The peel-off method is very similar to the simmering method, except it starts out by sauteing the rice in some form of cooking fat. Whether it's butter or margarine or oil, you'll add that to the pan first. You'll add some aromatics, maybe like scallions or other onions. Maybe you'll break up some vermicelli and put that in there and stir it around. Maybe you'll have some slivered almonds. You put them in and stir it around, but you'll coat all them with fat. Then you'll dump your rice in, dry rice, on top of that. Stir that around, get the butter or oil coating all the rice, and then dump in your cooking liquid, bring it up to the heat and reduce to a simmer and continue cooking it. The risotto method is considered one of the hardest methods of making rice because it requires a lot more attention. Essentially what you do is you start out with your rice and your cooking liquid. Now again, this is generally about 4 times the amount of cooking liquid to the rice, and you bring that up to almost a boil. You'll add about a third of it at the start to your rice, and you stand there and you stir it and you stir it and you stir it. And the concept is that you're helping to wash off some of the starches that are on the outside of this, on the outside of the rice, and getting that into the water. So what's going to happen eventually is you're going to end up with kind of this porridge-like texture, kind of a little stickier on the outside, but the center of the rice still is al dente, to the bite, still has a little bit of firmness to it. So you'll ladle in just part of the liquid, you'll stand there and stir it and stir it and stir it until all the liquid is absorbed, then you ladle in some more. And that liquid that you ladle in has to always be very, very hot. And you stand there and stir it until the liquid is all absorbed, and you just continue doing this. And like I said, it takes about 22 minutes altogether to make risotto. All right, some cooking questions. When substituting brown rice for white rice, what adjustments are needed? If you remember, there were 2. We had to add more cooking liquid to it, and it took a little longer to cook it. So more liquid and more time. How much cooked rice will 1 cup of dry rice yield? 1 plus 2 equals 3. Very good. Which cooking method coats the ingredient in warm fat? It's the peel-off method, right? We got the simmering method where we just put it in dry, add the hot liquid over the top, bring it to a boil and reduce it. The peel-off method is the same as simmering, except we start out coating things with fat first before we add the hot liquid. When shopping for rice, what should we look for? The Grown in the USA logo. Very important to know the source of your product. Okay. International rice dishes. Here you'll see a list of a lot of different dishes, including those that are made here or originated here in the United States. But I would bet you're familiar with at least half these dishes that are on here. But rice are very important and central ingredient to all these different dishes, and these are just examples. So red beans and rice, of course, we associate that with kind of the Louisiana area down there, or the southern cooking. But what's important about this dish, this is a great vegetarian dish, because beans and rice as a mixture, when you take legumes and rice and bring them together in a dish, they form a complete protein with all the essential amino acids. So this is a great vegetarian alternative to a dish with meat in it. Fried rice is a great rice dish too. I used to work in a restaurant. It was a very international restaurant. I was the only American in this restaurant cooking on the line. And there were 2 Greeks, 2 gentlemen from China, and 3 Italians. And the 3 Italians were all named Tony. We had Big Tony, Little Tony, and In-Between Tony. That's actually what we called them. Well, one of the nice policies here at this job was we were able to cook whatever we wanted to for our own meals while we worked there. And one of the gentlemen from China wanted to learn about Italian cooking, and I wanted to learn about Chinese cooking. So I used to cook him Italian meals, and he used to cook me Chinese meals with the ingredients that we had available to us in the restaurant. And he told me that for fried rice, that it was best to use day-old rice. It was often they would use a long grain or a medium grain rice, and it was just a white rice that they didn't use the day before, and then they would let it dry out onto a sheet pan, and then they would use it the next day as a fried rice item. So they'd get a wok, put a little bit of oil in there, add some scrambled eggs, fry them up, push them off to the side, add some different aromatics ingredients in there, some scallions or carrots or peas, maybe some nuts, saute them up a little bit, and then they'd add the rice and they'd just let it sit. And let it sit and not stir it around until it would, kind of like a pot sticker, how it would kind of get a little crust on it, and then they would flip it over. Then they would stir all the ingredients together, season it with salt, white pepper, and sesame oil, and you had fried rice. Paella. You know, paella comes from southern Spain, and in our own country we have jambalaya. Jambalaya actually originated in the Caribbean. The Caribbean, old world people that arrived in the Caribbean were from Spain, and they brought with them their paella method of cooking, but they used the local indigenous ingredients and created the jambalaya dish. Okay. And sushi, another important item that has certainly gained a lot of popularity in the last 20, 25 years here in the U.S. Maki sushi, the word maki, means rolled sushi. All right, and here's examples of it right here. Rice bowls are a very popular use of the ingredient rice because it's quick to make, it's inexpensive, you can mix lots of different other ingredients with it, it's ideal for carry out, you can customize it depending on whatever people like to eat or whatever they have left over in their refrigerators. It's a wonderful item all the way around. And then any culture that has rice that they use for their side dishes and entrees, they also use it for their desserts. And so you'll find a different form of rice puddings all around the world. I was raised up in northern New York, and we used to make rice pudding up there when I was a child, and we would flavor our rice pudding with maple syrup. We used that as the sweetening agent that was in there. Okay, rice and cuisine. Why is rice for sushi washed before it's cooking? I mentioned that earlier on today. It releases its soluble starch, makes it sticky. But we also talked about not always a good idea because of losing the nutritional value to some degree. Which type of rice is commonly used in the preparation of rice desserts, like rice pudding? Short grain, but also you can use medium grain rice too. What is maki sushi? It's a form of rolled sushi. Remember, maki means rolled. And true or false, combining rice with beans forms a complete protein with all of the essential amino acids. And we know that to be true. Okay, we're here at the free resources from USA Rice Federation, and I'm going to be handing off the presentation to Amy, and she is going to take you through these web addresses that you can see at the bottom of the screen. And so I'd like to thank you for your attention and participation, and I'd like to congratulate you on investing the time in yourself for continued learning. All right, Amy, if you want to take them through and show them what USA Rice has to offer them.
Thanks, Bob. I'm just going to change our presenter here so that you can see my screen instead of Bob's. I think that you should be able now to see the minirice.com page. I'm hoping that's true.
I do.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then this is our food service page. So this website was meant and intended for food service professionals to use, but obviously there's a lot of education that goes along with food service. We certainly know that family consumer sciences teachers do a lot of that. So on this page, under the Recipes and Culinary Center, we have a menu item called Education Center. Under that, you'll see that we have chef demos, and you heard Bob talk about the video demos of the different cooking methods earlier. This section is where you will find those. Recipe concepts such as the fried rice and paella, etc., can be found in this recipe concepts area. And then teaching tool. And this is a very good section. This section breaks down each of the different areas that Bob just spoke about and has downloadable materials, including PowerPoints, that you can use in your classroom. So I really encourage you guys to take a look at this section, and especially this page, the Teaching Tools page, to have more resources to use. Additionally, we also looked at the California Rice page, and I wanted to show you that, calrice.org. And you can see that on this page they've got a lot of information about rice and the rice industry in California specifically. I also want to point you to the California Wild Rice page. This is the Wild Rice page, or a website that they've created, and they have everything from recipes to information on where you can purchase wild rice. Last but not least, we have an opportunity for you as family consumer science teachers and FCCLA advisors to participate in the U.S. Rice Classroom Challenge. There are lots of prizes available for teachers, and here on this right-hand column we also have more resources for you to explore. This is a contest that we've put together for teachers who participate in our Rice Challenge, and essentially there's 3 steps: develop a lesson plan, teach the lesson plan to your students, take pictures of the students eating the rice or preparing the rice, and then fill out the contest entry form. And you can see that it's just a typical entry form. You put a little activity summary in here, upload your photo, upload your lesson plan, and then submit your entry. You can also see what others are doing, and you'll see here this is a test that we have in here so you can see what it would look like. But as more lesson plans are created and submitted, this page will fill up with lesson plans from your fellow teachers. So I definitely encourage you to look at this section, or this page. The website is usarice.com/FCCLA, but if you just want to remember usarice.com, there's a tab especially for FCCLA right here at on the home page. That is a brief overview of all of the resources that we have on our website, and I encourage you to certainly go and look through what else is there to offer. I also encourage you to email either me or the USA Rice info email and ask us questions. We'd be happy to send you materials, send you videos, or rather DVDs, or a print copy of the tools, the teaching tools that I mentioned earlier on the food. Well, thank you very much for attending, and I hope that you found that this was a helpful webinar, and we look forward to hearing any feedback or answering any questions you have. So thank you very much.